Hello and welcome to the end of the world, liberals! I've been waiting for you here on planet Earth ever since Biden beat Trump in 2020 and you all went back to Planet Brunch. Yeah, nice to see you re-entering our home planet's orbit once again. You look a little distraught. You look like I feel. For those of you who are really just coming back to planet Earth, Donald Trump won the 2024 United States presidential election in, I don't know if you call it a landslide, but it was a pretty brutal beatening. For sure. It looks like Trump got 312 electors, needed 270, and Kamala Harris got 225. You know, what's crazy is this is the first time in 20 years or more that Democrats have lost the popular vote. This was the main dynamic of this election. You know, it wasn't that Trump picked up so many voters. He picked up a few 100,000 voters across the country, but Democrats lost 10 million in 4 years, and that tells you everything. People want to frame this as how could Trump win? Not how could Democrats lose, but how could Trump win? But the thing is, we're in a two-party system, so if Democrats lose, if Democrats did all this to lose it, there's only one other person who's going to win. Because Democrats, and they don't want to do this in a democratic way, so they get this rude awakening in the general election because they have no primaries. Their primaries are extremely skewed towards the right, towards the Democratic establishment, towards the corporate business elite at the same time. This was a refutation of elitism by the working class. So, you know, this is going to be a brutal 4 years, don't get me wrong, but this election, it's not all bad news. It was going to be bad news no matter what the turnout of this election was going to be bad news. It was going to be, you know, on the day after election day, the 2 days, whenever the total came down, or just a few days after election day, if a total never came down or not, this was going to look like the worst possible result of a presidential election that could have been. So here we are, and what definitely seems like the worst possible result, which is the Trump landslide almost. That's not good. That's not what I expected, not the narrative the media was pushing, but that's where we are. 2024. You know, Trump won it. Hands down. This is kind of the worst case scenario. You know, it would have been nice if Trump would have won by just a little, and if Democrats would have held on to the Senate and the House. I mean, maybe not nice. It would still have been a right-wing monstrosity, but at least there'd be a little bit of balance, a little bit of push and pull. They'd be spinning their tires a little more. And that's what we want. When you have a corrupt government, you really don't want it doing anything. It's better to have it incompetent and doing nothing than being efficient and getting a lot of shit done. You do not want a corrupt government passing stuff. And part of the problem with that is, though, so many Democrats will always vote with the Republicans when they have a slight majority that they can get away with a lot. You know, even when Democrats have a slight majority in one of the houses. So that's one of the wonderful things about our completely broken politics in this dying nation.
Happy birthday.
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Happy
You have them by the pussy.
birthday, Mr. President.
You have them by the pussy.
Happy birthday.
Let's look at the bright side of things. We're going to be optimistic here at the end of the World Party for once, since, you know, liberals usually love optimism. So let's be optimistic instead of just capitulating like, of course, liberals and Democrats are. The Democratic pundit establishment is doing right now, very much capitulating because they're all rich. What do they care? They didn't have anything on the line anyway in this election. That's why we ended up with Harris versus Trump. Because liberals are the people who run the party, the people who run the media machine, and basically the democratic machine, which is the party apparatus, the funders, the donors, and most importantly, probably the media. That is the democratic machine, and they got the candidate they wanted, like they always do, and then they lost savagely. So I think all you sad, half-decent people deserve a thorough look into why, because everyone's got their agenda, everyone's got their own narrative they want to pump to push their agenda that is, of course, going to fit with their own preconceived political beliefs. So why shouldn't the End of the World Party do the same? So here we are.
This is your president. There are some things we should talk about, if that's all right. I've been thinking quite a bit lately about something we can all relate to, something that is unquestionably, inescapably American. I am referring, of course, to our great national pastime, baseball. Or so it had been. That's right, America. Before we were devastated by atomic war, each state had its own professional baseball
They're eating the dog.
And so what is the bright side of these apocalyptic politics here? Well, for one, first and foremost, you could say that this, on some level, was a refutation of the genocide, of Democrats supporting genocide. This was voters telling Democrats that genocide is a deal breaker. And of course, that wasn't the biggest dynamic, probably. Probably the economy was a bigger dynamic. But it's really hard to gauge how big of an impact that was, because third-party anti-genocide votes got something like less than 1 million votes nationwide, unfortunately. But we knew Jill Stein wasn't going to win, so most people probably just stayed home, like I did. Just didn't vote. And that's as much of a vote of no confidence. And that's why Democrats lost. A lot of their base stayed home. It wasn't just people voting for Trump. It was people who normally vote Democrat not showing up, or people who voted Democrat in 2020 not showing up. And what better way to depress turnout than by pretending to be the lesser evil while committing a genocide? And how is that going to inspire people to turn out? And much less the youth, who are more plugged in with TikTok, Instagram, and social media platforms where you actually hear this stuff, not the boomers watching cable nightly news. They're not going to cover the genocide for the most part, and you're not going to see the type of things you're going to see a steady stream of, just images of a live stream genocide on social media. So the youth saw a lot of that, and one of the big reasons the Democrats didn't win is because the youth didn't turn out for them. Not to mention swing states like Wisconsin and Michigan with a high Arab and Muslim population, with even more uncommitted voters in the primary than the Democrats lost by. So it's pretty easy to see how 2 states right there and just overall depression of general youth turnout was key here. And that's a good thing. Genocide is a bad thing. Voters told Democrats that genocide is a bad thing, a deal breaker in a general election, because they didn't give us a choice in the primary. So that's how it had to be. And so I guess the other big strategic bright side of the Trump election and the GOP taking the trifecta and just this brutal electoral turnout, which Democrats surely will learn nothing from, but is that it was a kind of a whole refutation of the entire modern Democratic Party, of the swing to the right, whether it's supporting the genocide, the swing to the right, the status quo, doing nothing, and the economy, and the kind of elite class war that they waged in the propaganda sphere leading up to the election, when they had all these super rich celebrities and all your favorite millionaire pundits on cable news. As long as it's not Fox, they couldn't understand how you could elect Trump again. And the Cheneys, this was crazy what they were doing. They're like, it was just a huge blitz with money. And I mean, I saw ads on YouTube, a lot of ads on YouTube where they were really striking a Bernie Sanders kind of anti-billionaire tone. And yet Harris had more billionaire donors than Trump did.
These were the commercials I saw for the Democrats.
Sherrod Brown is working to fix our border crisis.
Mondaire Jones is working to secure our border.
Pat Ryan is restoring order at our southern border.
I'm Laura Gillen, and I'm here at the border of Nassau County. We're 2,000 miles from Mexico, but we're feeling the migrant crisis almost every day.
In Nassau County, by the way, Suffolk County, make my day. You want a piece of our strip malls? You're going to have to go through Laura Gillen. Those are the Democrats. The Democrats. I gave the police more money than they even wanted. I gave them planes and tanks. I built a moat around the country and filled it with alligators and chlamydia. They didn't talk about pronouns. They didn't say Latinx. It was the opposite.
We can't let China steal Wisconsin jobs.
Benefits for illegal immigrants? No way. Blocking support for white farmers? I mean, look at me.
Standing with law enforcement against defunding the police.
I've owned a gun my whole life.
Let me be clear. I don't want boys playing girls' sports.
You all know me. I've never pushed for sex changes.
So this was kind of a refutation of the Democratic Party leaning into plutocracy. Voters saying that this is not going to work, which would be an obvious to anyone with 2 brain cells, but nobody with 2 brain cells has any pull in the Democratic Party, so we end up with a fucking shit show like this. And, the economy was probably the big determiner here, but, it's very related to all of this, and where the Democratic pundits just wanted to shame people, talking about, oh, look how great the stock market is, look at the unemployment rate, but ignoring inflation, which inflation focused on things that definitely hurt the poor and working class and poor working class the most. And the more money you have, the more they benefit you. So it's this kind of split economy that Democrats just can't recognize, and all these intellectual, super educated liberals will just deny when this is people's lived reality day to day. You know, your rent's going up. I don't know. You're homeless. Your food prices are doubled, tripled, and then they'll point to the inflation rate in the last year. It's like, oh well, the rate is back within the Fed's target rate for inflation. Yeah, but that's not prices going down. So this might look great to you if you really don't care because you're a freaking millionaire, and what the hell do you care? You got a New York Times column that's coming, and you're worried about your deadline and how you're gonna tell liberals that everything's fine, and everyone who worries about the economy is just ignorant. Really, and it's kind of elitism. It was a very much an elitism, and this was also a refutation of the Democratic Party leaning into that elitism. I hope they they're clearly, at this point, but it's been like a week and a half since the election. Clearly, they're not learning. They're not going to learn. So that's that's the dark side of the bright side. Like there is a bright side, but the downside is the Democratic Party doesn't have to learn, because they are the automatic alternative to the Republican Party, and they have total incestuous control over their own party and the future of it, and everything they do at the top level. This is not good. This is not good at all. But I mean, there was no other way. What was the other way? To tell Democrats keep moving to the right, tell them to keep embracing the Cheneys, tell them to keep saying fuck you to climate science. We're going to keep fracking because it's an election year, and so we don't believe in anything. At the end of the day, if you believe in nothing, no one's going to have your back. Voters are going to eventually give up on you. And we saw a big dropout, 10 million votes between 2020 and 2024 that just didn't show up because Democrats were so fucking disappointing.
People who think of politics in terms of lesser evil, I think, have to accept all the logical and probable consequences of what they believe. And I don't believe any Republican administration would have dared do what the Clinton administration is doing about welfare, especially as it affects children. I think they would have been so afraid of what the Democrats would have said and maybe done about it. There's some jobs so dirty only a Democratic administration can do them, and that is part of the lesser evil calculus, unfortunately. It's the thing that people usually leave out.
So why did Kamala Harris lose in her historical bid for presidency? I mean, obviously the economy.
It's the economy, stupid.
It's inflation.
Okay?
And Democrats doing nothing to do anything about it. I mean, Democrats want to brag about a record stock market, which is fucking insane. Low unemployment rate. Everyone knows employment rate it doesn't really tell you that much. And everyone will admit that when the other party wants to use the employment rate for their agenda, for their narrative. But it's like a lot of government metrics and economic metrics. They love to use it when it suits their agenda, their narrative at the time. But when it doesn't, then they call it a totally bunk metric that doesn't really tell you what's really important to the American people. Things like, the number of people living paycheck to paycheck in this country has gone up since 2020, from 58 to 66%. Percent facing financial hardship, 32 to 37%. That's up in the last 4 years. Food insecurity is up 2% in the past 4 years. And I'm not even sure if these would really catch it, because so many poor people fall through so many cracks that I don't understand how any metric can really catch them all. So the reality is, anyone who's not fairly well off or rich knows that people are suffering, that people are struggling, that inflation is whooping our ass here. And what do Democrats do? Pander to millionaires. They sure don't support progressive policies. They turn their back on them because it's an election year. Suddenly Kamala Harris is no longer the progressive who once ran for the nomination in the Democratic primary in 2020. Now she's a hard-nosed right-wing realist in the Democratic Party.
I have a Glock.
Household food costs have increased 35% since 2020. And yet they want to point to the stock market, the unemployment rate, when food costs 35% more in the last 4 years. They want to talk about the inflation rate this year. Oh, well, inflation rate's back, where the Fed's target range or close to it. And that doesn't bring food prices down, though, does it? And you don't understand that if you're fucking rich and don't give a shit. So that's one big problem the Democratic Party had in this election, was they're rich and don't give a shit, and they don't know. They have no fucking clue. They're way too distant from the reality of the working class in this country. And that is the big takeaway of this election. That is where their 10 million votes went. I mean, I'm sure you might have lost 1 million here or there to the Gaza genocide, to, I don't know, other things. Even like crypto regulation under Democrats, which was crazy if you don't pay attention. But I'm sure a lot of people lost a lot of money because Democrats said fuck you at the bottom of a market cycle and didn't pass any legislation or anything. They just had the Goldman Sachs SEC chair take his own action. And, that probably cost, I don't know, 1 million or so votes and, won Trump 1 million or so votes.
That's a lot of money.
And so talking about the economy, one thing that I think is very much understated is the impact of pandemic aid and those $2,000 checks that everyone got only because of Donald Trump. Look, anyone who's being honest knows that only happened because of Donald Trump. That wouldn't have happened under another Democratic president. Certainly wouldn't have happened under a Republican president, because Democrats just don't have the courage. They'd be scared of being called socialist if they were going to be socialist. And this was the biggest socialist experiment that America has seen in modern times. At the end of the day, that was a lot of free money. That was a weird kind of half-assed socialist handout. But it was, as fucked up as it all was, as incompetent, as corrupt, and everything as it was the biggest socialist experiment that modern America has ever seen, probably ever will see. And it only happened because of Donald Trump, whether you want to deny that or not. And, the fear of the initial pandemic period, that had a lot to do with it. But I'm sure Obama would have been reasonable, calculating, political realist, and just had the poor suffer instead of get anything that might help them not go out and spread a new virus that we didn't know shit about, because we don't want to be socialist. So there was one moment where this really hit me, where this was actually about a year ago. I was working with someone in the South, and so just telling this story to break a lot of conceptions that people might have. I was working in the South, and someone I was working with, well, there's a handful of us, went back after the day at work and having a couple beers at our place and started talking politics, of course. And so I was the only white person there, and everyone else was black Southerners. And some of them were from like the deep South. And, I learned had worked in like automotive plants and different fucked up industries where they were super exploited. And so one woman had lost her arm in a factory in the deep South, being exploited, not paid enough, obviously. And she was very much a Trump supporter at that point. And a lot of it came back to the checks and just the economy in general and how we were all living after 3 years of Democratic rule and the economic reality that the poor experienced. The difference in that economic reality under these two administrations, whatever excuses, whatever you want to say about it, there was a very different economic reality for a lot of the poor, especially in places where that $2,000 check is going to go a long fucking way for people who've maybe never seen a $2,000 check before. Like, that's a fucking game changer. And I mean, there have been studies on this, that this helped people massively during that period. And what emergency or not, for reasoning or not, Trump or not, whatever, the reality is they got those checks, and this is the only time it's ever happened, and they've never had that kind of government support or help in their lives. A check coming in even just as a PR stunt with Donald Trump's name on it. Doesn't matter. What they care about is that it delivers. Like, economics is kind of like, it's like the laws of physics. If you're hungry, if you're homeless, if you're not eating, if you need food, the price of food, the price of housing, these are like as strict quantifiable determinants as everything involved with climate change, as carbon concentration, as everything else. And so when this hits the poor and working class, the people who really have no options, there's no pretense, there's no equivocation, there's no lying about what happened. They got the money, they needed the money, it helped them massively. It happened under a Republican president. It's never happened under a Democratic president, and it probably wouldn't have. Whether people know that, think that or not, the reality is it probably wouldn't have, because Democrats have no courage at all, and Republicans would have just called it socialism, and so Democrats would have said, oh, that's socialism, we can't do that, we're not Bernie Sanders. And yeah, I think, honestly, the whole pandemic response would have been so much worse, despite all the crazy shit Trump said, because this is another thing, another understated thing that almost no one wants to talk about at this point, because everyone just wants to forget the pandemic. But Biden's pandemic response was fucking monstrous. As soon as he came in, even as soon as he won the election, pandemic was over. It was almost like the COVID-19 pandemic was, for liberals, a metaphor for Trump. And I said this even before Biden won. I said, they're going to give up all pandemic precautions, all pandemic aid, everything. The pandemic will be over once Joe Biden wins. And what happened? Joe Biden won, pandemic was over. Of course, he still did interviews 60 feet away from his interviewer for a few months, and which is very much not normal, let me assure you that. But, you know, the kids had to go back to school, and people died because of that. I know people who died because Democrats wouldn't say, no, let's keep the schools shut until we get vaccines out. No, it was Biden won, Trump lost, pandemic's over, go back to school, everything's back to normal. And guess what? The biology said it wasn't. And so, you know, I know some of the, you know, one of the best people to be fighting for a better future. He died because of this, because of what I would say is of 100, basically, I would say murdered by fucking Joe Biden. Murdered by Joe Biden. And I don't think, you know, if he were here today, I don't think he would take any issue with that. Because, fuck, that was one of his last posts on social media, was about Biden and Harris's failure on the pandemic. And then what? And then he's in the ICU. And then what? It's death. I don't know. Basically, his lungs dissolved and he died at young 30s. He was one of the people fighting the hardest in this political system to make it better. Maybe even was key to flipping Georgia when it flipped. Because, well, it's a long story, but yeah, died because of Biden.
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
You know, Biden and Harris, they killed a lot of people by pretending that the pandemic was over. And all pandemic aid ended. That all disproportionately and immensely helped the poor and working class in a totally unprecedented way, and in a way that they should never expect again. And I think they know that. And that all happened under Trump and was ended under Biden. And whatever you want to talk about it, but the political and the pandemic realities underneath it, that's what they saw. That's what they experienced. And if you can't see that, then that's on you as a Democratic Party strategist. And we're still in the pandemic today, but no one wants to admit it. And then we've got things like, who knows? How are we going to deal with, you know, monkeypox or the avian flu or any of these things if they really start to pick up and spread, which, you know, H5N1 seems to be. Where's the Biden administration on it? The same place they're on every issue. Who fucking knows? I don't know. Ask your favorite consulting firm. You know, give them a few $1,000s for an opinion or something. Like we don't seem to have a government anymore. We have like a constellation of consultants and pollsters and pundits and the donor class scumbags telling themselves all what they want to hear. They're all in their own same world. And that's why one of the beautiful things about this election is popping that bubble. But of course, did it work? I don't know. That's the big problem we're going to be at here. And of course, so why else would Kamala Harris have lost this election? Well, of course, there's the genocide, which probably lost Michigan and Wisconsin because of it. And, you know, third-party voters turnout was low, under a million for Jill Stein. I think it was like 600, 700,000 for Jill Stein nationwide, which is, pathetic. I don't know, what would you expect? But I think part of that was that it's not just the best metric for the anti-genocide vote, because I think most of those people would probably just not vote. I mean, it's so dispiriting to say that, I have to go vote against genocide for someone who I know isn't going to win. It takes time and effort. Like, personally, I didn't. It's best to just vote no confidence. Like, my electeds who I knew were going to win, who I wanted to win, won. Everyone else I didn't care about. I knew they were going to win. So I didn't bother to go to vote, because I knew that my representatives who I wanted to win would win, and I didn't really care about anyone else. So I didn't go vote. Probably a lot of the same with a lot of other people. You know, even though I would have liked to register one vote in favor of Jill Stein just to say fuck you to the Democratic Party strategy here and the genocide, but I didn't, because I knew she wasn't going to win. She wasn't going to get the 5%. If they weren't going to win in 2016, when you had Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, two of the most unliked people in modern America, if the Green Party wasn't going to get federal matching funds out of that, if they weren't going to make a decent showing, then they probably never are, which sucks. And it comes down to a lot of the American psychology. And it's just the psychology that I just said that I fall victim to. It's just not, if they're not going to win, I'm not going to bother to go vote for them. And so that's why I just think it's not a smart metric to use as a gauge of the anti-genocide vote that didn't turn out for Harris. And I think there are some places, like Rashida Tlaib's district, where you can see clearly. I mean, she almost lost enough votes in that district alone to lose the state. You know, so clearly she lost Michigan because of genocide. But What about every single other swing state? You know, other than Wisconsin. What about every single other swing state? I mean, what's crazy is in Pennsylvania, she flipped on fracking just to win Pennsylvania, it seemed like. And same with Senator Festerman or whatever. Piece of shit. Like, they love fracking because they think it'll win them votes. And yet she still lost Pennsylvania. So she said, I'll kill the world for votes, and she'll still lose the votes. This is just the perfect distillation of the Democratic Party. Absolutely amazing. So, one of the other big surprises of this one was the youth vote. Oh, the youth vote didn't really turn out for Democrats this time. It seemed to turn, especially young men, turned massively for Trump. Which, that sucks. That's a very bad thing. But, you know, these same people have also watched a genocide on their phones for a year. Probably have PTSD from TikTok and Instagram from watching hundreds, thousands of children torn apart by bombs that they paid for while they, you know, can't afford or get into massive debt for college, can't afford healthcare, can't afford housing. And yet their taxes are going to completely bomb a nation into nothing. I mean, it's the most psychotic, evil shit ever. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of Gen Z was probably lost because of the genocide. On top of it, these same people, whether they were old enough to vote at the time or not, I mean, they saw what the party did to Bernie Sanders and the progressives in the party. In 2016 and 2020, what they did to Bernie, and then what's happened in recent months in the primaries this year, pushing out Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman for opposing the genocide in Gaza. And where was the party on that? Did they have their backs? No. And what the party did to Nina Turner. AIPAC, some oil magnates, they spent money to stop Nina Turner in the primary. And, you know, of course, the Democrats showed up. You had Nancy Pelosi and Jim Clyburn show out to make sure that Wall Street and AIPAC had their candidate put into place in the primary. In the primary. That's things. These scumbags always show up in primaries. It just shows how little, A, how they despise democracy, B, how right-wing and corrupt and evil they are, and C, how little they care about winning and respect their voters. And then they expect the people to not see what's going on. I mean, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Nina Turner, these are some of the most, on top of, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who both won. These are some of the Democrats that have the most pull with the youth. After they watched what happened with Bernie Sanders and seeing all this, this is, I think Gen Z has seen some things, whether they were old enough to vote or not when they saw them, and seen how the Democratic Party operates. So no shit you're not going to win their votes. On top of the whole weird alt-right kind of, masculinity pandering podcast sphere bullshit that happens online. The whole what's it, Justin Tater, or what is his name? Something Tater. I don't know. Whatever, the Taters and all the other freaks who go on about the emasculation of the modern male and all this shit. It's like, dude, these people are so insecure. It's just hilarious. And at the same time, the Democrats want to pander to that whole posturing masculine impulse nonsense. I mean, when they have Tim Walz, talking about on the debate stage how I love to hunt, and they do, photo shoots and PR stunts with him going on a hunt. Because Democrats, we like to kill too. Give him my shotgun, go down there, shoot a little bird in the head. I'm a real man. It's so pathetic. I mean, when people go into that shit, you just realize, no, you are not a real man at all. You can't even think for yourself. You are so insecure that you're just a little bitch. Like, fuck. Can we say that? Okay, Trump won again. Can we use the B word again?
Bitch.
Can we say that? Look, if you're running around so worried about the perception of your masculinity, that you're doing stupid shit, guess what? You're a little bitch. You're a fucking little bitch.
Bitch.
Call you taters bitches. Whatever that motherfucker's name is. Taters bitches. I mean, and where are Democrats at on this? They just go along with it. They want to be more militant, more pro-police.
I have a Glock.
We love hunting too. Love eating meat. Slap some burgers on that grill. I'm just Joe Biden on the campaign trail. It's fucking nonsense. Quit pandering to this bullshit and fucking grow up. Quit being fucking primitives.
Don't give a shit about the temperature in Guatemala. Don't really see what all the fuss is about. Ain't gonna worry about no future generations. And I'm just somebody gonna.
So yeah, speaking of the youth vote losing, I mean, let's be real, part of it had to have been, part of it's cumulative. I mean, Democrats have lost voters every election cycle for years because of how they've run, especially starting, well, we can start with Obama and how disappointing he was from the beginning, but he won his re-election. So, you know, we have to look at what they did to Bernie Sanders and what Obama helped do to Bernie Sanders and the entire party. You know, the way they sabotaged him twice in a row and sprinted to the right. And then, you know, we're surprised that they lost and they wanted to blame Bernie bros for not voting for people who completely ideologically opposed them, but you know, they wanted to be on the same team, but the Bernie supporters, the progressives, get nothing they want. But they want us to be on the same team and show up for them. And yet, when it comes to healthcare, climate action, anything, any policy, any fucking policy at all, Democrats will stab you in the back. And so I saw a lot of this. I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders in 2016, and I saw a lot of resentment in other delegates, much less normal people, non-people who weren't involved to that level, but especially from delegates, those of us who were in that fucking convention center in 2016, yeah, I mean, some of those Bernie delegates turned into Trump supporters. I mean, I had friends turn into Trump supporters. Some of those Bernie delegates just left politics and never thought about it again. Oh, what a blissful life that must be. And some of them just kind of caved to the Democratic Party, found a career in politics, and, you know, went along with the whole mess and became part of the problem, ultimately. So here we are. The problem has metastasized. And so where's resentment politics at now? I mean, part of it, you're seeing some of this disgusting sentiment. You're seeing it from places that you wouldn't even exactly expect it from, like Joy Reid and different people. But you see it online, of course, in the comment sections. But these are also real people. So let's not act like the ugliness we see in the comment section is un-American or inhuman. It's very much human. It's very much American. But you'll see Democrats saying, oh, you didn't vote for Kamala Harris because she's committing a genocide. Well, now I don't care about your genocide anymore. I'm going to go drink Starbucks. I'm going to end my Starbucks boycott because you didn't vote for Harris, who is committing the genocide. So it doesn't make any sense, but I mean, you're seeing this resentment dynamic. And also saying they're happy about deportation, seeing how many Latino males voted for Trump, and saying, oh, well, now have fun when half your family gets deported. Like, even if you disagree, this is just a psychotic thing to say. It's psychotic, and it's just the next step of Trump derangement syndrome, making Democrats and liberals lose their fucking minds in all the bad ways. But I mean, I think a lot of this, you know, we heard for years, Bernie supporters heard for years, the day after the 2016 election, the day after Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump, we've been hearing nonstop even from some progressives and Bernie supporters, but especially from Democrats, liberals, partisans, saying, you know, stop relitigating the 2016 election. We got to move forward, all this, blah, blah, blah. Basically not wanting to think about it or learn anything from it. But the reality is the 2016 primary was a serious civil war within the Democratic Party. It was the choice between moving towards the youth, towards progressivism, and, you know, slightly to the left, towards climate reality, away from the large donors, towards small donors, which is Bernie's presidential campaign proved that small donors could raise the kind of money to make a competitive presidential campaign, which before that we really didn't know. And that's of course, money in politics is one of the biggest dynamics in American politics. So that was an important thing to learn. But that election largely came down to that progressive impulse fighting against the old entrenched ancient establishment regime of big money, corporate interests, Wall Street, oil and gas companies, meeting Republicans in the middle every time, and the same type of people who would, you know, be hugging on Liz Cheney a few years later, bragging about having Dick Cheney's endorsement. You know, the same Chuck Schumer.
This is the second point, for every blue-collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up 2-3 moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin. The voters who are most out there figuring out what to do are not the blue-collar Democrats. They are the college-educated Republicans who lean Republican or are independent.
Strategy of appealing to Republicans instead of working-class people. And obviously that's just insane. That's an insane strategy. But, you know, Democrats have lost so many voters over time with this, and voters will give them a second chance. And then what do they do with it? Now we saw that those voters, now that they gave Democrats a second chance with the Biden administration, if that's how you want to look at it, we saw record inflation. We saw Democrats saying fuck you, committing a genocide, still saying fuck you to progressives after they screwed over Bernie again. And there's a lot of people who just have so much resentment for the Democratic Party that there's no way to get them back. One of the big things you'll hear the pundits talking about now is, why did so many Hispanic and black people, especially men, but in general, vote for Trump this time more than before? Like, you know, what's going on here? And the reality is, I think part of it is, I mean, there's levels to it. Part of it is, I think Trump is not as racist as people portray him as. Trump doesn't care about race because Trump only cares about himself, you know, and like, yeah, okay, he might like white people more in general because he's white, but he's not some kind of ideological Klansman at the end of the day. And of course, he said plenty of racist shit. And yeah, as an agent, he's racist. As a political machine, he's racist, but he's not racist like a grand wizard or something. Like, look, if he thinks you being friends with Kanye West or whatever, anything, like, you know, and people will see these things, and then they'll see what Democrats do when they're in power, and then the economic reality of it overrides everything. And so if people think we're going to have a better economy and things are going to be affordable again under Trump, they're going to overlook whatever racism they think there might be or not. Because at the end of the day, their real threat is not being able to pay their bills. Their threat this isn't the 60s. People aren't worried about the Klan coming to their house and lynching them. Like, thank God, but hopefully we don't move back in that direction. But there's also a good chance that we just won't. That this whole identity politics, fear-mongering that the left has been using for their personal benefit on social media and everything, and within their own social movements, and the Democrats have been using, and that has been co-opted. Because let's be real, this whole resurgence in identity politics on the left came from the grassroots, came from the actual left, not from the Democratic Party, but from the real left, from the grassroots. I was there on the ground, you know, in 2011 in the Occupy Wall Street movement, being called racist for thinking we should focus on the financial industry. And you know, even the craziest thing was, you know, the early 2010s, having other leftists call you racist for thinking that you should think about climate change, that we should have some kind of focus on climate change, because that was a white liberal concern, which it blew my mind at the time. But I think it took me so off guard. I was just kind of took years to process. But now it's fucking insane. And this is now then, you know, climate change was probably a big factor in Trump's first election and in the rise of fascism and the right, the xenophobic anti-immigration right worldwide. And this was obvious. This was so obvious to be expected. And yet, you know, this was the left, you know, 10, 15 years ago, pushing this identity politics that came 2016 time. Actually, it was really largely, of course, it happened during the 2016 primary as Democrats embraced identity politics because it meant that they didn't have to embrace economic populism, economic progressivism, because they could say Bernie Sanders is a white man, and here we are, a white woman with all the black people around her, I guess, the black influencers and social, podcast people and shit, like, and especially with her being anointed by Obama and being in his cabinet, it really was an identity politics war waged there. And so Democrats and their media machine really embraced identity politics to fight against the Bernie Bros and Bernie Sanders. And oh, what happened 8 years later? Such a shock. Such a shock. Guess what? You know, a lot of the Bernie Bros, and of course a lot of the white men, and even a lot of the people who you took for granted, as you know, during those times, a lot of those demographics shifted to Trump. And you've got this historic loss, Trump coming in for a second term, and it's going to be a fucking monstrosity. And yet you Democrats built this. But I guess the fatal choice here was early on, which I always said, but since I'm a straight white dude, you know, my words on the left count for less than nothing. I might as well be a Klansman here, trying to tell the left, talk to the left about strategy. But I always said that embracing identity politics was stupid. And I mean, this is a whole long conversation. But identity politics is always right wing. It's always about dividing people up based on their identity, which is superficial and stupid. And at the end of the day, identity politics, on one side of it, you have racial justice. On the other side, you have racism. It's the same coin, though. It is the same coin. So people don't want to admit that. People who, on the left, they'll say like, well, black women in the 60s invented it. Yeah, they invented the term, but the reality of what identity politics is, of the power dynamics that people use and social, political circumstances around their identities. Yeah, that is nothing new. That's probably, racism was the original identity politics.
Don't forget speciesism.
That identity politics of the 60s made sense because that was more about survival. It was, especially for black women at that time, like that was a lot more about the survival benefit that solidarity gave you, and the heuristic of looking at who is most exploited and oppressed in a society and saying, if you want a better society, improve things for them. And that's 100% makes sense. But, we haven't adjusted anything for the way things have changed since then. And we're not in the 60s. Things on that level aren't as bad as they were in the 60s. But we also haven't fixed anything. We haven't addressed anything. We haven't really had these conversations as a country. And so all these stupid primitive problems still fester while we've got total ecological and climate collapse, plutocracy, fascism rising, and all these other societal, totally civilizationally destabilizing problems coming to, destabilize our civilization. So yeah, with identity politics, the media machine really went behind it, and you ran with that for years. And I think that created a lot of more resentment. I think it was new to the modern culture in the mid 2010s, around 2015, 2016 election times, and that was when it really got ramped up in order to defeat Bernie Sanders. Because Bernie Sanders, let's be real, Bernie Sanders was the only threat to the status quo that we've seen, I guess, in my lifetime. The only real political threat on a national level to the corporate, plutocratic, far-right, death cult status quo of American politics was Bernie Sanders. So they pulled out all the stops. And I think they burned down their party in the process in numerous ways. And they just, you have got a big floppy tent and you set a bunch of sides on fire because you seem to make sense for you. And then what do you get after you have a big tent that you've set a couple fires in? You don't really have a party anymore. You're a fucking mess. Anyway. So yeah, once the media ran with identity politics, and that became a very democratic thing, and we had the Black Lives Matter movement when Democrats were all behind it. They got down. Remember when these jokers got down on one knee for George Floyd or whatever in their photo op with African colored garments? What was all that? That was the goofiest shit in human history. And then what happens when they take power? Of course, that was when Trump was in power. What happens when they take power? 2023, we've got more police murders than any year ever. Dude, they just give up. They don't care. They start rolling back defunding the police and all that stuff that they pretended that they cared about when they were under that immediate social pressure at a political electoral climate when they were forced to take it serious. And now that they're not, you see that they were never serious. Shocking. And I guess one of the other interesting things is currently here in Georgia, and so Kamala Harris lost the state of Georgia by around 116,000 votes. And interestingly, it was almost the exact same number of people who signed the referendum to stop Cop City, and then were subsequently ignored by the Democratic leadership, who were going to just build Cop City on top of the forest, on top of Tortuguita's corpse, on top of the rights that they've trampled. I mean, how many people? I know people who have domestic terrorism charges for being at a music festival. Literally, they didn't do it. They didn't throw a Molotov cocktail. They weren't involved in organizing anything. They weren't even involved just from out of town. I mean, they charged them because they were out of town, so they could say that this is an out of town movement. And this was all by Democrats under Biden's administration. And where was Biden, who could have came in and said anything? A word from Biden could have changed this whole dynamic. And yet, not one word from Biden, not one word from Harris about Cop City. The historic murder of Tortuguita to build it. And then what happens? They lose the state by the same number of votes who signed the referendum. Like that's I'm not saying that's why, because that doesn't make sense, but it's just a funny little coincidence to add on to the pile of bullshit that the Democratic Party has become and buried themselves under.
The American way. Don't you, my darling America, deserve that? Don't you deserve a future free of war and fear and terrible uncertainty?
And I just want to speak real quick to Democrats losing such a chunk of the Latino vote in this presidential election, which they're like, oh, well, how? When Republicans say such racist things and they say they want to build the wall. Well, guess what? Democrats did build the wall. Guess what happened before Trump came in and Trump was demonizing migrants? Guess what happened? Latinos called Obama deporter-in-chief because he was deporting so many people. I know personally a lot of people deported by Obama. I don't know anyone deported since, but like the Biden administration has been deporting just as many people as Trump, except they've been doing it closer to the borders. They haven't been doing raids. They've been deporting recent refugees.
We
more.
have cut the flow of immigration by over
I don't
half.
know. What are the ethics of that? Is that even better? And then on top of it, we're saying we haven't really seen a U-turn from Trump's immigration policies, whatever it is. Biden continued building the wall. Harris bragged about. This is the crazy thing. Was Harris? They want to call Trump a kind of xenophobic fascist for building his little racist wall, and then they want to brag about how he's too incompetent to build it and how they built it for him. So what?
Let's talk about this compromise bill that you want to pass if you're elected. You said that's going to be a priority. It includes $650 million in funding for the border wall. That's something Republicans wanted. That was part of the compromise. Under Donald Trump, you criticized the wall more than 50 times. You called it stupid, useless, and a medieval vanity project.
How much of that wall did he build? I think the last number I saw is about 2%. And then when it came time for him to do a photo op, you know where he did it? In the part of the wall that President Obama built.
You're doing this compromise bill. It does call for $650 million that was earmarked under Trump to actually still go to build the wall.
I'm not afraid of good ideas where they occur.
So you don't think it's stupid anymore?
And I mean, now we're saying, apparently there's a scoop coming out, where Biden plans another asylum ban, which, he's ramped up asylum rules, and basically at the Trump level, it's insane. I mean, the reality is Democrats are not really better on this issue than Trump. They pretend to be. They talk nicer about it, and maybe they're slightly better. And we got DACA because of Obama, and that was great. But Trump also left that, so we'll see what happens with that. But Democrats are just as monstrous. It's just that the media doesn't care. The Democratic machine doesn't care. And of course, Republicans don't care about migrants, so they're not going to pay attention when Democrats are in charge. So basically, Democrats can do whatever the fuck they want on immigration when they're in power. And then when Republicans are in power, Democrats are going to virtue signal over it. AOC is going to go to the camps and cry. And then where is she now? I mean, I guarantee you that same camp is still full of people, and there's probably more up the street now. And where's AOC? Chilling for Biden, chilling for Harris, crying because Harris lost now. It's just so insane. I mean, the more I say this stuff out loud, the more I'm like, holy shit, what the fuck?
Recreation, healthy competition, all will live again. This country will live again. But for now, my America, we must part. Restoring the greatest country in the world to its former glory, well, that takes time. Until we meet again, this is your president, signing off.